For the past 2 years, the state has been trying to fix some serious problems with transportation, especially on the MBTA. To tell us about a progress report and what's been happening with finances and performance is the new director of the Transportation for Massachusetts Coalition, Chris Dempsey. Thank you very much for being with us, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Let's talk about what people have been experiencing, especially on the T. The
Sure.
past couple of years, at least it's not 215 all over again this winter. So why is it better now?
Well, we all remember the winter of 2015 where the system completely shut down. In fact, there were multiple days where the MBTA didn't run at all. And there were people like me, I was one of them, who couldn't get to work because the system was shut down. We've obviously made enormous improvements since then, and I think you have to credit Governor Baker and his leadership for pointing the system in the right direction and showing some progress. At the same time, there's really a need to continue to invest more in the system. We need to think big on transportation if we're going to make sure that our system supports the kind of economy that we want in the 21st century.
Talk about things that might need to be given a lot of money, because we've heard stories before too about, this commuter rail extension didn't generate much ridership. Why are we wasting the money? So where do we really need to spend?
Sure. So you can look at some of the bigger projects, some of the extension of a rail line, for example, but there's also other smaller things that we can do that can really improve the system. Here's one example. Your studio, Chris, is right on Commonwealth Avenue. So the Green Line is running up and down Commonwealth Avenue with the traffic. And there's technology that would allow the Green Line trains to actually have some control over the traffic lights, so that if there's a Green Line train with 200 people on it, it can get a longer green light and extend that green light and get faster through the intersection, so that it's not waiting for maybe one or two cars to make a left turn. That's a relatively small investment, and it can make a real improvement in people's lives on a day-to-day basis.
What about the Fairmount Indigo line? Because we have some service there. They've had some steadiness problems back a while, and some people say it ought to be more like rapid transit too.
Well, the Fairmount line is in a corridor that really is underserved by transit. And that link can be right to downtown where there's good access to jobs and other parts of the transportation system. So our coalition is very supportive of further investment in that line. We want to make sure that it does look more and more like a rapid transit system and less like a commuter rail system. I think that will benefit not just people that live in that neighborhood, but really benefit the regional economy.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Chris Dempsey from Transportation for Massachusetts. Chris, one thing I'm sure you were familiar with back in the days of trying to block Boston 2024, when they were looking at these facility sites for the Olympics. This place in Dorchester, Kosciuszko Circle near Columbia Point, and it's just a knot of congestion, traffic hazards, and yet at the same time people looking at the same area for lots of new development too.
Well, I know that's been a focus of Mayor Walsh. In fact, I think that was in his district when he was a state representative, and something that he really wants to address. And I'm confident that the city and the state will find ways to improve that going forward. It does have some good land for development, and there probably should be more development there, but the mayor's been very clear that he only wants to see that development when we also see improvements to the Rotary. I think that's a really good outcome.
Looking at the T itself, there are things in the pipeline. There's some new trains in the red and the orange line. What about that? I mean, it looks as though that's got to be the low-hanging fruit here.
Yeah, so I think everyone should be excited that in the coming years, every single one of the red line cars is going to be replaced, and some of the orange line cars. In fact, I think the majority of the orange line cars. Some of those red line cars were actually built in 1969, and they're still on the tracks today. So the fact that we're going to get a new set should really improve service across the line. The other thing that's great for your viewers in Boston to know is that not only will they benefit because they're going to see new red line cars, but those cars are actually being constructed in Springfield in Western Massachusetts. So that investments that are going to help the eastern part of the state are also going to create jobs in the western part of the state. I think that's a great idea, it's a great outcome, and we should all be really proud of that foresight to build the project that way.
Of course, the other thing people are looking at spending for is that we need access to transportation for housing growth. How pressing is that need from new housing?
Well, transportation and housing are completely tied, and I think there's broad agreement that housing costs in Greater Boston are too high, and we don't have the housing stock that we need to support the workforce that we want to have and that our businesses want to have. So connecting existing housing with transit is actually a great way to help alleviate some of those challenges. It doesn't solve all of your problems, but it can really help. And I think there's been a focus of transit advocates to extend service, like, for example, the Green Line to Somerville and Medford would unlock some housing there for commutes that'll be a little bit better than what folks have today, where they have to get on a bus to get access to the core system. So transportation can definitely play a role.
Now, what about the likelihood of having enough money for these improvements? We're talking here mainly about capital improvements.
Well, so I think what our coalition would say is that there's certainly part of the problem is managing your existing resources better, and we need to do a better job of that. And I think the governor's been very focused on that and very successful at that. But at the same time, we also need to look at new revenue sources to make sure that we're funding the system that we all want in the 21st century. We're at the point now where our lack of investment really holds back our economy. And if we're able to make more investments, we can actually grow the economy for everyone, unlock some of that housing, as we talked about, and make people more productive and give them a better quality of life.
Of course, another problem that T has been struggling with is not so much having money for improvements, is having people who can put that money into play. You've got the planners and the managers. We're still looking for a general manager, by the way.
Yeah, so the governor just announced that he's going to look for a new general manager. The interim general manager has been Brian Shortsleeve, who I think has done a really good job and has been very focused on closing an operating deficit, a structural operating deficit. But you're right, good managers in public transportation are really important. It's not just about the steel and about the concrete. It's also about the people and the brains and how you actually make things work better as a system. So we're very supportive of making sure that the MBTA has the staff and the management that it needs to make sure that it's operating as efficiently as possible.
And you had somebody come up with a great idea for getting rid of snow, right?
What's that?
Oh, somebody who.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
On the rail line. So one of the MBTA employees figured out that there's really a better way to clear some of the rail lines, and that's part of the reason why over this winter and last winter, the T's been operating a lot better than it did in 2015.
All right, thank you very much. By the way, if people want to see the report in full, what's the best place for
They should go to our website. So our website is www.t4ma.org, and the 4 is the number 4.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
Chris Dempsey from Transportation for Massachusetts. Up ahead, we'll have sports with Pat Flaherty.